This is VOA Africa. Hello, I'm Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori in for Esther Gideyuwat. It's Monday, December the 14th. This is Africa 54. Due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, Voice of America is taking every necessary precaution to safeguard its employees, so our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future as we, out of an abundance of caution, reduce our staffing at VOA headquarters here in Washington. We are working to help keep you informed about what is going on, and we appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Nigerian parents on Monday are still trying to find out what happened to hundreds of boys abducted by gunmen on Friday. Many of them converged on a secondary school in Nigeria's northwestern Katsina state on Sunday, seeking information. The army exchanged gunfire with a gang that took the students from the Old Boys Government Science School in Kankara, according to a spokesman for President Muhammadu Buhari. Over 300 students are still missing. The school has an enrollment of 800 students, and about half of them were still unaccounted for on Sunday, according to the Nigerian Vanguard newspaper. Somalia is struggling to hold an indirect election that will determine the next president after opposition candidates accused President Muhammad Abdullahi Farmaajo of stacking the election committee. Mohamed reports from Mogadishu.
There are 15 candidates in Somalia's indirect election for president, and where the clans choose members of parliament who then elect the president. But all 14 candidates running against incumbent President Abdullahi Farmaajo have accused him of stacking the election committee. They say the committee is made up of Farmaajo's supporters and spies from the National Intelligence Agency or NISA, so they have formed their own.
Our concern is about how the committee was made of, and we have some of the members, or majority of the members, are from the NISA, National Security Agency, and some of them are from the civil servants, and some of them are known supporters of the current president, Farmaajo.
The political standoff has delayed Somalia's parliamentary election, which was supposed to begin on December 4th. It also raised international concerns about Somalia's stability, already threatened by Al-Shabaab terrorist attacks.
Al-Shabaab cannot be defeated only by the National Security Army. It cannot be defeated if not all the forces, all the Somali forces, either from the federal government or the federal member states, are working together.
The terrorist threat to campaign rallies and polling stations led Somalia in September to delay its first one-person, one-vote election and hold an indirect vote instead. The U.S. announcement this month to withdraw its 700 troops from Somalia has already added to worries about the political deadlock.
The government needs to take leadership. They are responsible for the security and well-being and political stability of the country. And they need to just sit with their colleagues. People who are, they are arguing with are their predecessors. The former presidents are the ones that are actually leading the opposition groups.
At this week's Somali Partnership Forum, U.S. Ambassador Donald Yamamoto called on the opposition and the federal government to reach out to resolve their differences. Ahmed for VOA News in Mogadishu, Somalia.
Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara is being sworn in Monday to what his party is calling a new term following his re-election in the October 31st election. The opposition boycotted the election because they say the vote was an unconstitutional third term for Mr. Ouattara. But President Ouattara says his second term was really his first because of changes to the country's 2016 constitution. The opposition set up a parallel government called the National Transitional Council, and the government responded by arresting opposition leaders. In Ghana, the presidential candidate for the main opposition National Democratic Congress is calling for an independent forensic investigation into the recent elections. Former President John Dramani Mahama says the conclusion of the inquiry will determine the opposition party's next move. Mahama's remarks come after the Electoral Commission declared incumbent President Nana Akufo-Addo winner of the presidential poll with 51% of the vote ahead of Mahama's 47%. In part one of Viewers' exclusive interview with Mahama, he tells Peter Cloete that the Electoral Commission must learn from the errors it committed to ensure they are never repeated in future polls.
Well, in the run-up to the election, there were a lot of flaws in the process, and we kept drawing attention to them. And it's like the Electoral Commission was adamant to our call, but on election day, we saw exactly what happened. This is the most incompetent election we've had. I mean, everything about this election does not reach the standard that Ghana's Electoral Commission, has attained for itself. Ghana's Electoral Commission is held in high esteem as one of the best electoral commissions. Unfortunately, this election, she can't even get the results right. The declaration is all over the place.
Mr. President, I saw your press conference where you rejected the result. So with this rejection, what are you going to do to make your case to the people of Ghana? Since you said they voted for you, how are you going to convince them that you won the election?
Well, we know we did, and we are currently doing a forensic audit of all the constituencies. First, to establish what happened there, and then secondly, to reconfirm the figures that we have. Because this case might end up in court, I don't know. I cannot mention anything for now, but we're doing an audit, and based on that, we'll take whatever decision we need to take. But I think that the incompetence the EC has shown, it will be useful for us to do a forensic audit of the EC's own systems and the numbers to come to what the final number for the EC is. Because as of now, I don't know what number they're going to gazette.
But Mr. President, what is your reaction to the African Union poll observer mission that came out saying that the elections were transparent and credible and that most people were not prevented from voting? The ECOWAS poll observer mission led by Madam Johnson Sirleaf said the same thing, that it was peaceful and transparent. So what do you say to these prominent African organizations that monitored the poll, pretty much giving a stamp of approval to the elections?
Normally, when you have an observer mission like that, you need to wait and see their final report, because often they give the report up to the point of counting. And it's true, I mean, the whole day was peaceful. People went about, voting without any problems. And the queues were orderly. And so they'll say all that. And there were a few instances of people caught with pre-printed ballot sheets. I mean, the video evidence is there. Normally, their final report will capture the collation process. And so this report does not capture the collation process. And a lot went wrong with the collation process.
Mr. President, 4 years ago, when you lost the election, you handed over peacefully. I was here in Accra when you held a news conference that you had called then opposition leader Nana Akufo-Addo to concede. People are saying you have proven that you are a true Democrat. They said, why are you not doing the same thing now?
In the interest of the more than 6 million people who voted for me, I must uphold our democracy and hold our Electoral Commission to higher standards and hold this government to a higher standard in terms of our democracy. I mean, the way they've conducted this election, the government, President Akufo-Addo, and the Electoral Commission, is a dent to our democratic credentials as a government. And so in my principles as a Democrat, I can't be seen to be sweeping it under the carpet and just letting it go. I think that we must bring closure to this by seeing exactly, where the issues are. And I mean, if an independent audit is done by the EC, we bring somebody in to crunch the numbers, do an independent audit. If I lost, why not? I mean, I'll be the first to concede and walk away. But as long as that is not done, and I know that there was a deliberate attempt to subvert the will of the people in favor of the incumbent, it will be wrong for me in terms of our democratic practices to just leave it, because we will not learn the lessons of this election. I think that we must learn the lessons of this election so that we don't repeat it in a future one.
In Tuesday's part 2 of VOA's exclusive interview with former Ghanaian President John Dramani Mahama, it tells Peter Cloete that the National Electoral Commission failed to competently administer recent polls. The U.S. Embassy in Khartoum says the White House has removed Sudan from the U.S. list of state sponsors of terrorism, according to an embassy Facebook post. The removal of Sudan from the list is effective as of Monday. The designation of Sudan as a state sponsor of terrorism dates back to the 1990s, when Sudan briefly hosted al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden and other wanted militants. Delisting Sudan is a move that could help the African country get international loans to revive its battered economy and end its pariah status. It's also a key incentive for Sudan's government to normalize relations with Israel. Sudanese Prime Minister Abdullahi Hamdok briefly visited Addis Ababa Sunday for peace talks on Ethiopia's Tigray region, where fighting has caused tens of thousands of people to flee to neighboring Sudan. But Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed says the violence in Tigray has stopped and that there is no need for Sudan's offer to broker a ceasefire. Hamdok's visit was initially scheduled to last for 2 days, but will return to Sudan after only a few hours. It was not clear why the trip was cut short. The International Red Cross says the first non-governmental aid convoy since fighting erupted last month in Ethiopia arrived Saturday in Mekelle, the capital of the northern Tigray region. The aid consists of desperately needed medicines and other medical items. The ICRC says the healthcare facilities in Mekelle became paralyzed after supplies of drugs and surgical gloves ran out. The Ethiopian government restricted access to the region after fighting began on November the 4th between government forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The conflict is believed to have killed thousands of people and displaced around 950,000, according to Reuters. Supercooled shipments of newly approved coronavirus vaccine rolled out of Pfizer manufacturing facility in Michigan Sunday for rapid air freight distribution to regional hubs across the United States, paving the way for some Americans to start getting vaccinated as early as Monday. But polls show many adults are unsure about getting it. White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara has the latest.
This hospital in Chicago is preparing to deliver COVID-19 vaccines made by Pfizer-BioNTech that were approved for emergency use by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration Friday night. Logistical challenges include keeping the vaccine at the extremely cold temperature of minus 70 degrees Celsius, using specially designed temperature-controlled thermal shippers and freezers.
That ultra-low freezer we can only open for 2 minutes at a time, otherwise it'll go out of range, so we have to be very precise in our movements. And once we take the drug out, we have to move it to the refrigerator within a 10-minute time frame so it doesn't fall into the ultra-quick defrost. If it defrosts too quickly, we only get 2 hours stability. If we can defrost it slowly, we get 5 days of stability.
Immediately following the vaccine's approval, President Donald Trump released a video on Twitter hailing the news as a medical miracle. He said the first immunizations would take place in less than 24 hours.
We want our senior citizens, healthcare workers, and first responders to be first in line. This will quickly and dramatically reduce deaths and hospitalizations.
Trump's announcement followed media reports of his chief of staff threatening to fire the head of the Food and Drug Administration, Stephen Hahn, if he did not grant emergency use approval by Friday.
All of these rooms are full of COVID.
Vaccine approval came as COVID-19 cases soared, with almost 300,000 confirmed deaths. Yet some Americans are skeptical about vaccine safety.
I definitely feel like it's too fast. We don't know the side effects. It hasn't been tested long enough.
We want to make sure that this works for real, because you don't want to take something that is going to make everything worse for you.
A recent survey by the Associated Press shows about half of U.S. adults say they won't get the vaccine or are unsure if they will.
Good afternoon, everyone.
President-elect Joe Biden, who spoke Friday morning after the vaccine was recommended but not yet approved, sought to allay public skepticism of political influence in its approval.
You should have confidence in this. There is no political influence. These are first-rate scientists taking their time, looking at all of the elements that need to be looked at. Scientific integrity led us to this point.
Despite the vaccine's approval, there is still much planning and details to be finalized at the state and local level in terms of when and where Americans can get the vaccine.
In the case of healthcare workers, you can find them in healthcare settings. And in the case of long-term care residents, certainly they're in long-term care facilities. So it may not mean as much for the first two priority groups. But once you start to talk about essential workers, the elderly, those distribution points and pointing to where people need to go and at what time will be absolutely critical.
The U.S. is now the 6th country to approve this 2-dose regimen, including Britain, Bahrain, Canada, Saudi Arabia, and Mexico. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News.
The United States, nearly 3 million doses of the nation's first COVID-19 vaccine will be delivered this week to states to administer to high-risk health care workers as the nation's death toll from the disease continues to rise. Michelle Quinn reports.
It's a moment of hope and a dark time. Trucks begin rolling across the U.S. this week, delivering the first COVID-19 vaccine. 2.9 million doses to states. The first recipients of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine, high-risk healthcare workers and people who live and work in long-term care facilities. The excitement at the beginning of the vaccination effort comes as U.S. cases of COVID-19 surge and deaths from COVID-19 approach a grim milestone. Nearly 300,000 people have died from the disease, according to the Johns Hopkins University. One state that is struggling is New Jersey, which is seeing a surge of COVID-19 cases.
For all the good news, the light at the end of the tunnel, and the vaccine exemplifies that as much as anything, the next number of weeks are going to be hell, I fear. So we're begging with people to please, please, please don't let your guard down.
As the vaccinations begin, the Food and Drug Administration will consider emergency authorization of a COVID-19 vaccine from Moderna. Public health officials are worried some people will balk at being vaccinated.
So there are a lot of people out there that are hesitant to receive the vaccine for any number of reasons. So I believe we've got to communicate the safety, the efficacy of these vaccines, the importance of what this means for us individually and for our global community.
The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has warned of vaccine nationalism, which could leave poorer countries struggling to get the vaccine. As countries feel pressure to shift resources for vaccines, there are other risks, says Chizoba Wanodi, Nigeria Country Director for the Johns Hopkins International Vaccine Access Center.
And so where is that money going to come from? That money is definitely going to displace healthcare spending for other things. And if you think about the burden of disease in, let's say, developing countries, there are a lot of people actually asking questions about weighing the benefits, right, of shifting funding to the vaccine versus other healthcare programs.
Other COVID-19 vaccines are on the horizon. Still, health officials stress that vigilance against the infection has never been more important.
The vaccine gives us great hope for 2021, but this current surge of increased disease gives us great pause. We still have to adhere to those three W's. Wash your hands, wear your mask, and watch your distance.
Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
2020 has been defined by the COVID-19 pandemic. A disease that was unknown a year ago has killed more than 1.5 million people and devastated economies worldwide. In October 2019, public health experts ranked the United States at the top of a pandemic preparedness index. Now, the United States leads the world in the coronavirus cases and deaths. VOA's Steve Baragona looks back at a year of failures that brought the country to this point.
The failures began while the coronavirus was shutting down cities in China and Europe, says Georgetown University health law expert Lawrence Gostin.
We didn't prepare. We knew this was coming. We should have known. We should have been prepared. When it did hit, the first major problem that arose was testing.
The first test from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention did not work. Then, months of shortages, backlogs, and long waits for results let the virus get out of hand. It did not help that President Donald Trump repeatedly undermined his own health officials, says University of Michigan science historian Howard Markell.
This wasn't an administration that was used to dealing with experts, or not only didn't appreciate them, didn't even respect them.
When CDC's experts recommended in April that everyone wear cloth masks, Trump read the announcement and then undercut it.
So it's voluntary. You don't have to do it. They suggest it for a period of time, but this is voluntary. I don't think I'm going to be doing it.
Masks quickly became something Democrats embraced and Republicans resisted, never mind the science. Polarized politics also muddled the difficult balance between protecting health and the economy. Trump and Republicans mostly sided with the economy. USA! Like in April, when Trump backed protests against coronavirus restrictions, but only in states with Democratic governors.
When the President of the United States urges insurrection against those measures, that's not a small thing. That is a devastating blow to the ability of our nation's leaders and public health agencies to actually fight this pandemic.
Given his opposition to prevention measures, it's perhaps not surprising that Trump caught the virus himself in late September. But it's not just leaders to blame, Gostin says.
We just seem to be, as a nation, incapable of doing the little things that would keep each other safe, like masks or distancing.
From college spring breaks in March to Thanksgiving travel in November, Americans ignoring public health warnings have kept the virus going. On the other hand, the American government has put billions of dollars into developing a coronavirus vaccine, which is now paying off, Gostin says.
And America is now in the forefront on vaccine development, along with other countries. And it could be our saving grace.
Vaccines from drug companies Pfizer and Moderna were developed faster than ever before, with others right behind them. As the year of the pandemic ends, the vaccines that may end the pandemic begin to arrive. Steve Baragona, VOA News.
A prominent African research scientist says if the world is to get a handle on this pandemic, it is vital that a vaccine is tested, regulated, and taken on the continent. She says Africa needs a vaccine that works for its people. We met up with her in Nairobi, where she is trying to change hearts and minds about the benefits of COVID-19 clinical trials and vaccines.
Many people will die if COVID-19 continues at the pace at which it's going. Our lives will keep on getting disrupted. Life will never get back to normal. The economy will collapse completely.
My name is Catherine Choktunji, and I'm the Executive Director of the African Population and Health Research Center.
We need a lot of people to take up the vaccine, and even though we don't do it for ourselves, we need to think about doing it for the people we love. I may get COVID and not be adversely affected, but I may give that COVID to my grandparent who ends up dying. So if you think about your loved ones, how the best way to protect them is to get vaccinated and also get them vaccinated. I think it's important for people to know that getting vaccinated is a choice. And I think governments should not try any moves to force people to get vaccinated. They would strongly encourage people to get vaccinated because without enough people getting vaccinated, no one wants to live a life where every so often you have to stay at home, you can't go out, you can't visit your parents, you can't do this, you can't go to school, everything. There will be restrictions for the next 2 years, if we don't get, if you don't get the transmission under control. And the only way that can happen is if people get vaccinated. The reason why we need to test this vaccine in African countries, part of it is to be sure that the vaccine will work, because Africans generally have a different genetic makeup. Secondly, it is to be sure that it will work amongst people with conditions which are prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. HIV, TB, the neglected tropical diseases. We want to know that there's high prevalence of malnutrition. Does the vaccine work the same in people who are underweight because they are malnourished? So if we don't do that, we'll never know. And the danger is that we find that the vaccine works in populations which are completely different from African populations, and the whole world is celebrating, and the day it comes to Africa, then we find there are issues, that it has maybe severe side effects in people who are HIV positive, or it doesn't work at all. So we cannot know that unless we test that. Now, in the 90s, Africa was also, especially during the HIV epidemic, there would be many trials which would be done. The trial would end, the drug would be manufactured, and it would be unaffordable for African populations. So the thing that concerns me most is that the vaccine will be there in every part of the world except Africa. And perhaps for us, we'll get it in 2022 or something like that, once the rest of the world has satisfied its demand and has vaccinated all its population. So I'm more concerned about whether we'll ever get a vaccine and when that will be. Trials are guided by what we call ethical principles. And one of those principles is what we call justice. And the principle of justice demands that the risks and benefits of any new innovation, whether it's a treatment, whether it's a vaccine, should be equally spread out across the population. It shouldn't be that some groups of people take the risk of the trial and then another group take the benefit. And as I've said earlier, that's what was happening with HIV. Trials in Africa, treatment in the US, or treatment in Europe. So that was why this principle of justice, the main aim of it is to protect vulnerable populations from being exploited. They take the risk of participating in trials, but then they don't get the benefit. And in the last decades, there have been so many investments in the regulatory environment for research and science in Africa. There have been huge investments in building capacity, in training, in infrastructure, in resources, to make sure that the regulatory environment in Africa is strengthened. So what was 20 years ago, 25 years ago, is not the same. The things which happened before, the community has learned from them, governments have learned from them, they've put in place all sorts of safeguards. I don't blame them for being afraid, but I think people need also to understand that the world has moved on and that there are scientists whose livelihoods and whose passion depends on doing good. The regulatory environment is very robust and very strict and very strong, and people should trust that the scientists will do the right thing for their own good, but also because the environment forces them to.
Catherine Chobutungi is the Executive Director of the Africa Population and Health Research Center in Nairobi. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us in Washington, thanks for watching.